I stood dead center in what was meant to be my sanctuary, gazing at a moss-eaten slab and the blackened skeleton of a home that had vanished into memory. $300 to my name, a rucksack containing my entire earthly existence and absolutely zero alternative destinations on the planet. The Montana breeze sliced right through my university sweatshirt as if it were mere tissue, and the realization hit me with brute force. I had reached the absolute nadir. 21 years of age, and I had finally discovered the basement of life. But I am skipping the prologue. Allow me to explain the path that led me to a scorched pasture, wondering where I might lay my head before the sun went down. They call me Caleb, and 6 weeks prior to landing in Big Sky Country, I was halfway through my third year at UW in Seattle. I wasn't setting any records, but I held my own. Solid enough to secure a grant that took care of the bulk of my educational fees. Distinct enough to land on the honor roll 2 separate times. Distinct enough to convince myself I was constructing a future with a real foundation. The correspondence arrived on a grim Tuesday early in February. It sat in my pigeonhole, a stark white packet stamped with the school's official crest. From the bursar's department. I tore into it absent-mindedly, anticipating standard paperwork regarding the upcoming term. Owing to fiscal realignments, we are sorry to notify you that your funding has been terminated effective this very moment. I scanned the sentences 7 times over. I tallied every single pass, yet the meaning refused to sink in. I rang the administration. I marched to their offices and sat for 3 agonizing hours just to get a human face in front of me. I fired off messages, submitted formal grievances, and pleaded with every soul who might hear me out. It was all for naught. Fiscal austerity, they claimed. Strictly business. Hundreds of peers were in the same boat, yet it struck me as an intimate betrayal. It seemed the cosmos had examined my existence and chose to yank the single string keeping the whole tapestry from unraveling. Lacking the grant, the fees were impossible. Lacking payment, I couldn't register. Lacking status as a student, I lost my bed on campus. The domino effect was rapid and unforgiving, one catastrophe sparking the subsequent one before I could even inhale. I was already juggling a pair of gigs, 20 hours pouring lattes by the quad, and another 15 shelving paperbacks in the city center. I was carrying a maximum schedule, hitting the books until the witching hour, powered solely by espresso and grit. It remained insufficient. The numbers refused to balance. The guy I lived with began eyeing me with suspicion. The sort of glance that implied he was aware I was late on the electric bill contribution. The look that betrayed he was already scouting my replacement. And my folks? Lord, my folks. I dialed home on a Wednesday evening, perched on a slat seat outdoors, desperate to keep my pleading private from the room. The atmosphere was frigid and wet, standard for the Pacific Northwest, my exhalations forming mist that vanished into the gloom. Mother, I am in trouble. The funding is gone and I am lost. Dead air on the line. Then her tone arrived detached and calculated the specific frequency she used right before letting me down. Caleb, your dad and I have talked it over. We are firm believers in allowing you to navigate your own path. It is our parenting philosophy. But I am on the verge of total ruin. My roof, my education, every bit of progress I have made. Then you will solve it. That is the burden of adulthood. I fought the urge to shriek. I yearned to question what sort of parent observes their offspring sinking and labels it a lesson in resilience. I held my tongue, though, because even at 21, a tiny fragment of my heart wished they might soften. I clung to the notion that the perfect phrasing might finally make me visible to them. I am begging you, Mom. It is not a fortune, merely sufficient funds to survive this term. The pause lingered until I suspected a disconnection. Suddenly, my dad chimed in, rough and agitated. Boy, we provided all the tools for victory. If you fail to utilize them, the fault is yours. Welcome to the real world. Click. I remained on that seat for 60 minutes, observing peers stroll past, chuckling over parties and test anxiety. Issues that appeared microscopic against the chasm ripping open within me. That evening marked the moment I grasped a fundamental truth. My folks refused to assist, not due to inability, but due to a deliberate choice. Their affection was transactional, bound by terms I could never satisfy. I was solitary. Ever experienced that instant where your entire reality proves false, when your primary safety net simply steps aside? Drop your experiences below. I suspect our tribe is larger than we imagine. Survivors who discovered the hard truth that blood isn't always thicker than water. Now, back to the ring that altered my trajectory. 3 sunrises after my family turned their backs, a recording appeared from an unknown contact. A prefix from the Rockies, a gentleman's tone, formal yet gentle. Mr. Caleb Mitchell, Howard Patterson here representing the firm of Patterson and Associates out of Missoula. I am reaching out concerning the legacy of Eleanor Henderson. Kindly return my inquiry when you have a moment. Eleanor Henderson. My Nana, the woman who birthed my mother, a figure I recalled speaking with precisely one single time. The last time I heard her voice, I was turning 8 years old. She sounded frail but affectionate over the line, promising that one day I'd see her ranch out in Montana. I never made it. My mother saw to that. It was always too far, too costly, or simply the wrong time. Eventually, I quit asking, and the name Eleanor faded into an abstraction. She became a phantom from a history I was barred from accessing. I didn't even learn of her death until 6 months after the funeral. My mother dropped the news during winter break dinner casually, as if mentioning a change in the weather. "Your grandmother died, by the way. Just thought I'd mention it." No service details, no fond memories shared, just a cold fact served between bites of meatloaf before she moved on. Clears throat. Then, out of the blue, an estate attorney was calling for me. I dialed him back that evening, my pulse racing with an anxiety I couldn't name. "Mr. Mitchell, thanks for returning my call. I have some unexpected news," he said. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Henderson, has named you the sole heir to her property." I nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me, she left me the farm. It was 40 acres near a place called Willow Creek. The bequest covers everything," he clarified. "The land, the structures, the equipment, and all contents." My imagination immediately conjured a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch. I pictured animals, a sanctuary, a soft place to land while I figured out my life. "I don't get it," I stammered. "Why me? We were practically strangers." The lawyer's professional tone softened. "I can't speak to her motives, son. I just execute the will. You were her only grandson, and this was her final wish." The moment we hung up, I phoned my mother. Part of me hoped this inheritance might shift the dynamic between us. I thought a tangible link to her own mother might chip away at the walls she'd built. I couldn't have been more wrong. "That place is a money pit, Caleb," she scoffed. "Desolate land in the middle of nowhere, liquidated immediately and use the cash to finish your degree." "But it's a homestead. Maybe I could, I don't know, make a go of it." Her laugh was sharp, cutting deeper than any insult. You'd wash out in a month, just like everything else you'd try." And there it was, the unspoken label that hung over my existence: failure. In their eyes, I was perpetually teetering on the edge of incompetence. "It's worthless dirt," she insisted, just like those fairy tales she spun, romantic garbage from a senile old woman. But I clung to those fairy tales. They were scant memories, just fragments from a single phone conversation when I was a boy. I remembered Eleanor's voice, rich and wistful, describing sunsets that stained the sky in colors you couldn't find in the city. She spoke of air so crisp it healed your lungs and horizons wide enough to let you hear your own thoughts. My mother called them delusions. To me, they sounded like a lifeline. With zero options and nothing left to protect, that ranch became my only path forward. By Sunday morning, my mind was made up. I shoved my entire life into one backpack, a few changes of clothes, my laptop, some cherished books, toiletries, and the $300 I'd scraped together. That cash was my total worldly wealth. $300 and a crumpled scrap of paper with a destination scrawled in my own hand. Henderson Farm, rural, Route 7, Willow Creek, Montana. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. I didn't tell a soul. I purchased a Greyhound ticket and walked away from the only life I knew. It felt like surrender, like I was running away. Yet underneath the fear, it felt like the first honest decision I'd made in a decade. Not for my parents, not for school, just for me. I climbed aboard at 6 in the morning, claimed a window seat, and watched the Seattle skyline fade into the gray. The journey dragged on for 17 hours. 17 hours of watching the landscape morph through the glass. City concrete bled into suburbs, then scattered towns, and finally forests so dense they seemed to devour the highway. Snow-capped peaks loomed ahead. With every mile marker that passed, the crushing weight of my previous life began to lift. The constant pressure, the anxiety, the exhaustion of running in place, it all faded. But new fears quickly filled the void. What was I doing? I didn't know the first thing about agriculture. I had no strategy, no clue what kind of ruins I was inheriting. The lawyer had warned me the place sat empty for 15 years after Eleanor went into care. 15 years of decay. What was waiting for me? I forced the panic down and fixated on the one truth I had nowhere else to turn. This land was mine, and I had to make it survive. I had no choice. If you're still listening, let me ask. Have you ever taken a blind leap like that? Have you ever packed up and headed into the dark because staying put meant dying inside? Drop your story in the comments. Your bravery might be the exact thing someone else needs to read right now. Anyway, here is the reality of Willow Creek. The station wasn't a building. It was a lonely bench outside a gas station on the main drag. The driver barked out the stop. I hauled my pack onto my shoulders, and suddenly I was standing on a patch of dusty asphalt watching the bus tail lights vanish down the highway. The welcome sign claimed the population was 843. It was a one-horse town with a single paved strip and storefronts that looked like they hadn't seen a paintbrush since the pioneer days. I felt ridiculous standing on the shoulder. My university sweatshirt and those designer jeans with the intentional tears just made me look bedraggled rather than trendy. My running shoes were falling apart and my entire life was stuffed into the canvas rucksack slung over one shoulder. I was the textbook definition of a lost urbanite. The local filling station served as the grocery, the mail drop, and the town hall all rolled into one. Through the glass, I made out a few silhouettes huddled near the register nursing styrofoam cups. My destination was rural Route 7. Scanning the vacant blacktop, I realized there wasn't a cab or a rideshare app within 100 miles. Getting there was going to be a hike. We definitely weren't in Seattle anymore. Out here in the Montana, Stick's wheels are as essential as oxygen. I took a steadying breath and pushed through the door, instantly killing every conversation inside. 10 eyes drilled into me, dissecting my metro attire and blatant unfamiliarity. I might as well have been a little green man stepping off a saucer. The guy manning the till, a sexagenarian with skin like old leather and a gentle gaze, offered a tentative grin. His badge said Earl. "Do something for you, son. I'm looking for the Henderson place out on rural Route 7. Could you point me the right way?" The atmosphere in the shop instantly pivoted. The wary quiet melted into curiosity. "Henderson," Earl's brow shot up. "You kin to them. Eleanor Henderson was my grandmother. She willed me the land." More looks were traded. A lady by the coffee pot slowly lowered her mug. An elder wearing a feed store hat leaned in. "Well, I'll be damned," Earl drawled. "Eleanor's grandkid. She spoke of you often. Said you were out in Seattle. Always prayed you'd make the trip back here one day." That stung more than I was prepared for. She'd actually talked about me. All those years my mom kept us estranged. Eleanor had just been waiting. "I never got the opportunity," I murmured. "Not while she was still with us." Earl gave a somber nod. "Eleanor was the salt of the earth. Made the finest apple butter in 3 counties. Half this town is in her debt for one thing or another." The bell chimed behind me as a woman bustled in. She was maybe 50-something, dusting flour off her apron with steel gray hair knotted back for work. She froze the second she saw me. "You're Eleanor's boy." "Caleb," I said. "I'm Mabel. I run the eatery across the way." Her gaze was piercing. "Does a soul know you've arrived? Did anyone brief you on the farm? Just the attorney?" "Said it was mine." Mabel and Earl swapped a heavy glance. It was that specific look grown-ups give right before dropping a bomb. "Sugar," Mabel said softly. "Take a load off. There's things you ought to hear." She guided me over to her place, a cramped spot with cherry-red vinyl seats and the eternal aroma of roasted beans. She settled me into a booth, slid a mug my way, and sat opposite. "When was the last time any of your folks set foot on that land?" "Never, I think." Mabel let out a long breath. "That makes sense then, Caleb. The homestead is gone. It went up in flames about 12 years back, right after Eleanor went into the care home." The room seemed to spin. I clutched the laminate table edge. "Excuse me. It was a fire. Faulty wiring, they reckoned. By the time the volunteers got out there, it was just embers. But the paperwork mentioned buildings. The barn made it. Old red thing needs some love, but the bones are good. There's a pump well that likely still draws water. But the house, sweetie, that's been history for a long time." I sat paralyzed, the coffee losing its heat, trying to wrap my head around it. I pictured a fixer-upper, maybe dusty and peeling, but still 4 walls and a roof to shelter under. Instead, I had 0. "The dirt is still prime," Mabel went on. 40 acres of Montana earth. Eleanor's apple trees are still standing wild as heck, but living. The inheritance isn't empty. It's just not the sanctuary you were counting on. I fingered the $300 in my pocket. The bus had already departed, and my parents had washed their hands of me. I don't have a plan B. A plan. Mabel reached out, covering my fist with hers. Her skin was callous from labor, but her grip was tender. "We'll work it out. That's the way of things here." Can you picture traveling 17 hours on a prayer only to find that prayer was built on cinders? If you've ever felt the earth simply vanish from under your boots, you know that specific kind of vertigo. Drop a line below if you've been there. Sometimes hearing that others weathered the storm makes you think you can too. Earl gave me a lift in his battered truck. It was a 30-minute haul down a gravel track so reclaimed by nature we nearly missed the entrance. He steered around craters and downed timber while I felt my optimism bleed out with every jolt. We broke through a canopy of branches into an opening, and Earl hit the brakes. "This is the spot." I climbed out to survey my legacy. Where a home should have stood, only a ghost remained. Just a cracked slab claimed by moss with blackened timbers jutting up like the ribs of some great dead beast. Nature had reclaimed the wreckage, weaving wildflowers and high weeds into a chaotic sort of grace. The barn Mabel described loomed in the distance, a massive red skeleton with peeling skin listing to one side but refusing to collapse. Past the structure, the land rolled on endlessly untamed and overgrown. Somewhere in that sea of green lay the apple orchard Eleanor had nurtured for 40 years. It was dead quiet. No cars, no screaming sirens, no neighbors, just the breeze rustling the stalks and the faint murmur of a creek. Earl squeezed my shoulder gently. "Look, son, you don't have to stay here. Ride back to town with me. We can find another way." I shook my head. I couldn't put it into words right then, but standing in that wreckage, a feeling washed over me that had been missing for a long time. Hope. Not because life was looking up, it wasn't, but because I'd finally hit the floor and it was solid rock. I couldn't sink any deeper. The only way out was to climb. "I'm not leaving," I rasped, clearing the lump in my throat. "Just for tonight." Earl wouldn't budge until I took his number and swore I'd call if things went south. He finally drove off, leaving me stranded in the center of my legacy. The stillness hit me like a physical weight. I was a city kid used to constant hum and clatter. Out here, the quiet was so absolute it made my skin crawl. Then the layers of sound started to peel back. Birds calling from the canopy, crickets buzzing in the brush leaves, shivering in the wind, and water flowing somewhere near. I hiked my pack higher and headed for the barn. Up close, the place was massive, 60 feet long and 30 feet across, topped with a roof that had definitely seen better decades. The red stain was barely visible. Daylight showed through the slats, but the bones of the place felt sturdy. The door refused to budge at first. I shoved and hauled until I squeezed through the opening. The air inside was heavy and stale, cut by beams of light drifting through the cracks. Walls lined with rusted iron tools, corners piled with rotting straw. A tractor that belonged in a museum, and a wooden ladder climbing into the shadows at the rear. I headed up, putting my weight on every rung before trusting it. The loft was huge with plenty of headroom. The floorboards were thick timber and didn't give an inch under my boots. Mice had clearly nested in the scattered blankets, but the roof held tight against the rain. It wasn't a palace, but it was a roof over my head. This was base camp. I spent the rest of the daylight sweeping out decades of grit and shaking out the bedding, which was actually salvageable once the dust flew. I dug up an antique kerosene lantern that still had a splash of oil in the tank. Then, inside a crate next to the ladder, I uncovered the thing that would shift my entire perspective. A leather-bound diary, scuffed but holding together. I knew that script instantly. It matched the single birthday card I'd managed to keep all these years. Grandma Eleanor's handwriting. My hands were trembling as I cracked the cover. It started with the basic sowing seeds, bringing in the harvest, falling for my grandfather, and carving out a life on this dirt. But the entries near the end just tore me apart. After Grandpa passed and her kids took off without a backward glance, she wrote about the silence. She felt like the last watchman guarding a treasure nobody else wanted. Then I hit a passage that stopped my heart. My mind wanders to Caleb, my daughter's boy. I keep calling, keep sending letters, but they all come back sealed. The phone just rings and rings. I don't know why she's keeping him from me, but I pray Caleb knows I never stopped loving him. I always hoped he'd find his way back to this dirt. If any of my blood ever returns here, I hope they see the truth of this place. Not the backbreaking labor or the loneliness, but the liberty. The anchor to something real. The chance to shape a life with your own two hands. This farm was my salvation. And if I could leave my grandkids one thing, it would be the guts to walk their own road. To not fear the reset button. To understand that you can build something magnificent from zero if you've got the will. I sat there in the dust, hugging that book like a lifeline, and just broke down. Tears for the woman I never got to meet. For the time stolen by my mother's bitterness. For an old soul who died waiting for a visitor who never showed. And for me, the stray kid who showed up with empty pockets only to find out he'd been cherished his whole life by a stranger. Have you ever stumbled across an object from someone gone that felt like a direct conversation? A snapshot, a letter, a diary? It feels like a miracle, doesn't it? Like love defying the laws of time. If you've got a story like that, drop it in the comments below. Those threads connecting us are stronger than we think. That first night in the loft felt like it lasted a year. When the sun dipped, I learned what real darkness was. No street lamps, no glow from next door, just pitch black. The lantern cast a small circle of safety in a sea of shadow. The silence made every noise sound huge, timber-groaning critters scratching an owl calling out. I rolled up in the musty quilts, rested my head on my pack, and stared up at the rafters until sleep finally took me. My cell service was dead. No connection, no scrolling, just silence. I had never truly experienced solitude before that moment. It chilled me to the bone. My mind drifted to my parents in their cozy suburban home, to the roommate who had surely filled my spot by now, and to the future I had spent years constructing only to watch it crumble in a matter of weeks. I pictured Eleanor out here weathering decades of solitary nights on this farm, facing the crushing quiet and refusing to break. Sleep finally took me while I clutched her diary to my chest, a paper shield against the encroaching shadows. Dawn brought a transformation. I opened my eyes to a sunrise that defied description. The horizon bled magenta, tangerine, and amber, spreading like watercolor on canvas. The air was crisp, alive with bird calls and the scent of damp soil. I climbed down from the loft and stepped into the open. The morning rays softened the decay, making the place feel less like a graveyard and more like a blank canvas. Ghostly outlines of old flower beds appeared, traced by rotting posts and weathered stones. Ancient fruit trees stood their ground in the distance, twisted yet resilient. Following the murmur of running water, I discovered a pristine stream marking the property line. I bowed down and drank until I felt full to bursting. The liquid was so icy it hurt my teeth, but it tasted like pure life. I surveyed the acreage that now belonged to me. 40 acres, a weathered barn, a potential well, a dormant orchard, a flowing stream, and the whispered encouragement of a grandmother echoing from a handwritten book. I had arrived with nothing but a rucksack and $300 to my name, staring at wreckage where I had hoped for sanctuary. Yet, bathed in that golden light, I resolved to stay. I wasn't leaving. I was going to fix this. I intended to create a legacy for Eleanor, for my own sanity, and for every person who had been written off as a lost cause. I needed to show the world I could survive. That concludes the first chapter, but the real struggle was only commencing. I was broke, unskilled, and flying blind. All I had was 40 acres of wilderness and a notebook filled with an old woman's dreams. Next time, I will share how the locals rescued me. We will uncover the mysteries buried in the timber frame and face the adversary who tried to steal my future. If this journey resonates with you, please follow along to see how we make it through. Let's talk in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild from zero? Did you find light in the darkness? I want to read your experiences. Your words might be the lifeline someone else needs right now. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next installment. Day 2 greeted me with a hollow stomach. I had finished my emergency rations the previous evening, convincing myself I would solve the food problem when the sun came up. But sunrise didn't magically produce a meal. I was stranded on 40 acres of scrubland, miles from the nearest pantry, with only my boots to get me anywhere. Earl mentioned it was 8 miles to the village of Willow Creek, 8 miles of gravel and asphalt. I set out as soon as the sky turned gray. The chill turned my breath to vapor, but the rhythm of my stride generated enough heat to keep me going. Trudging down the choked driveway to the county road, I watched the Montana landscape reveal itself. Pastures, endless fences, and snow-dusted peaks guarding the horizon. 3 hours passed before the town limits emerged from the haze, my legs cramping and my belly protesting. Mabel was posed by the diner entrance when I approached, as if she had anticipated my arrival. "Get in here, I'm feeding you." I tried to decline, stammering about my empty pockets, but she dismissed my concerns with a flick of her hand. "Nobody mentioned a bill. Take a seat." She plated up a feast, eggs, cheese, bacon, buttered toast, and coffee dark as night. I devoured the meal like a starving animal. Once the plate was clean, Mabel clasped her hands and looked me in the eye. "Now, tell me the plan." So I spilled everything. The lost scholarship, the estrangement from my folks, the inheritance that was just charred wood and weeds, and the diary that convinced me to stick it out despite my ignorance. She absorbed every word without breaking in. After a heavy silence, she spoke soft and low. "Your grandma was dear to me, a truly good soul. She never stopped speaking of you, kept a faded snapshot of you right by her bed. She prayed you'd find your way here." To think she kept my photo close while I assumed I was forgotten. Ella Lennar had been holding space for me. "I regret never meeting her," I whispered. "You will find her in the soil in the work." Mabel leaned in. "I'm going to give you a hand, Caleb. Not out of charity, but because Ella Lennar would expect it, and because you have got her spark, meaning what? Grit, the healthy kind, the refusal to give up." She put me to work right then. 3 shifts a week at the eatery, bussing, scrubbing, whatever needed doing. $70 cash each day. She warned me the hike was brutal, adding that my youth was the only thing in my favor. I said yes before the sentence even ended. It wasn't dignity that kept me quiet. That well had run dry a long time ago. I was just floored by the grace of a stranger who didn't owe me a thing but gave me a lifeline. That was lesson 1 about Willow Creek. Folks here look out for their own. Not because they're keeping score, but because that's the unspoken code of the herd. Out here, survival is the group project. The nearest metropolis is hours away, and the cold doesn't negotiate with loners. I trekked back to the property that afternoon, pack heavy with staples from Earl's General Store. Loaf of bread, peanut butter tinned beans, strike anywhere, matches, and a torch that actually cut the dark. Earl tried to waive the bill, but I emptied my pockets to pay him. I wouldn't take the charity, but he forced something else into my hand that I couldn't turn down. Wisdom. He told me to look for an iron hand pump near the old borehole. Said it had been idle for ages, but the aquifer was deep. "Grease the gears," he said, "and you'll tap into it." That's priority number 1. Hydration, then a roof, then a meal. You tackle the mountain 1 foothold at a time. I chanted his advice like a mantra during the hike back. Located the spot the next morning, maybe 50 yards from the charred ruins choked by brambles. The mechanism was seized up with rust, the lever refusing to budge. But I threw my whole body weight against it, fighting the friction until the earth finally groaned. A wet cough echoed from the pipe, followed by a hiss of air. Liquid sludge spewed out thick and brown. I didn't stop pumping until my shoulders screamed, watching the flow slowly turn from mud to murky gray. An hour in it ran crystal clear and ice cold. I collapsed in the muck beside the spout and just roared with laughter. Hadn't made a sound like that in weeks. First objective complete. I had a source. Now I needed to get out of the elements. The hayloft kept the rain off, but it was a temporary fix. Spring nights were mild, but I knew the coming winter wouldn't show mercy up there. I required a fortress, not a nest, so I decided to tear that barn apart with my eyes. Devoted an entire day to shifting through the wreckage. Mostly rusted junk, snapped cables, busted tools, the carcass of a tractor long dead. Then I hit the shadowy rear corner. Beneath a canvas sheet, heavy with years of grime, I touched something that made my breath hitch. A vintage camper looking like something out of the 1980s with those soft curves and peeling cream paint sleeping under the dirt. I froze. I was terrified to believe it was real. I ripped the canvas back. The door seal was brittle and stuck tight, but I yanked the handle until it popped open. It was a time capsule inside. Dusty, sure, but a complete little world. A galley kitchen with a 2-burner propane range and a sink just waiting for a hookup. There was a booth that converted for sleeping, and tucked in the rear a bathroom with a chemical toilet and a shower stall tight as a coffin. The fabric smelled old and rodents had definitely nested in the foam, but the bones were good. It was salvageable. I sank onto the gritty bench and buried my face in my palms. Eleanor hadn't just bequeathed me dirt. She'd left me a fighting chance. Her diary for wisdom, the spring for life, and this hidden sanctuary for rest. It was waiting for someone stubborn enough to look. I whispered my thanks to her ghost. Then I spent 7 days scrubbing that rig from ceiling to floor. I washed walls with cold well water and shreds of old quilts and dragged the cushions out to bake in the sunlight. Polished the glass until clarity returned. Then I audited the guts of the machine hoses, wires, seals. Gas tanks were dry, but the lines held pressure. Water reservoir was sound. The plumbing needed chemicals, but the valves turned. Once I refilled the gas, the burner roared to life immediately. That's when Earl brought Harlan, a local farmer I'd met, to lend some muscle. We burned daylight wrestling that beast out of the barn, parking it flat near the water source. Harlan was a man in his mid-50s, skin turned to leather by a lifetime under the sun. He showed me the art of leveling the chassis with cinder blocks and running a gravity line from the pump. It was still manual labor to fetch the water. The toilet was a chore, and my only light came from the soft glow of a kerosene lantern and batteries. But I could lock the world out. I had a mattress. I had 4 walls against the storm. I had a place to belong. Ever experience a tiny victory that shifts your entire axis? A small mercy that rewrites the script. It proves that the light hasn't gone out, that grace exists even after you've given up on it. Drop a story below if you've been there. Remind the rest of us that magic isn't dead. The next month was brutal, yet somehow the most fulfilling time I'd ever known. I found a groove. Awake with the dawn, battling the overgrowth, fixing broken rails, mastering tools that were once foreign objects to me. I'd hike to the village 3 times a week to wait tables at Mabel's and end every night reading Eleanor's words by the flicker of a flame. Mabel stepped into the empty space where a mother should have been. She made sure I had a warm plate in front of me, waving away my money whenever I tried to pay. She taught me the rhythm of cooking on a propane burner and the old ways of keeping food without a fridge. Earl wasn't just a supplier, he became my lifeline. He let me put supplies on a tab when my pockets were empty, treating me with a quiet dignity that never let shame take root. They kept the past alive with stories of Eleanor and the farm's golden years. Harlan became my mentor, spending his days off walking the fields with me. He taught me to read the dirt like a book, to plant with purpose, and to work in rhythm with the land, rather than fighting against it. Your grandmother knew this soil better than anyone, he told me one quiet afternoon. She could make a fence post take root and bloom. Folks drove across 3 counties for her harvest, her canning that apple butter. If you want to survive here, you have to learn what she knew. How do I do that? I asked. Read her journals. Watch, listen, sweat. There are no shortcuts in this life. It is just showing up day after day. But if you stick with it, the earth returns every ounce of effort you pour into it. I took his words to heart, studying Eleanor's journal like scripture, mapping out planting times, rotations, and which crops grew best together. I learned the alchemy of composting, raising a heap behind the barn, and figured out how to keep pests at bay without chemicals. My first garden was humble, a 20 by 20 foot square in a spot Eleanor had loved. Rich earth, full sun, her sanctuary for tomatoes. I turned that soil by hand with an old shovel from the shed, working the compost in until my back screamed in protest. The seeds came from my tips at the diner. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, beans, squash, and herbs. I hauled water daily, walking the path from the pump until the grass was worn down to dirt. When green shoots finally broke the surface, it hit me hard. It might have been pride or hope, or just the deep, quiet peace of having made something live with my own hands. Then came the livestock. Virgil, an old farmer Harlan knew, let me have 4 laying hens for $30. He was in his mid-60s, retired from the heavy work, but he couldn't bring himself to give up his birds completely. When he found out I was bringing the Henderson place back to life, his craggy face softened. Eleanor would be tickled pink, he said. She always said this land needed young blood. He helped me rig up a coop using scrap wood from the barn and wire from Earl's store. He taught me the daily rhythms, caring for the birds, gathering eggs, keeping the foxes at bay. I named them Henrietta, Beatrice, Clementine, and Dorothy. They were names from the journal ghosts of chickens she had raised decades ago. When they started laying, it felt like striking gold. Breakfast fresh and warm every single morning. I even had enough to trade a few dozen at the diner. These tiny wins kept me moving. The first red tomato, the first jar of pickles made Eleanor's way. The first night I went to bed with a full stomach. Every small thing was proof I was moving forward. It was slow, agonizing work, but just as I began to believe I might actually make it, the world came knocking. I remember the moment perfectly. A Tuesday in early June, blue skies. I was weeding when a motor cut the silence, not Earl's rumble or Harlan's truck. This engine purred, expensive, smooth. A black BMW rolled into view, looking ridiculous against the tall grass and weathered fences. It parked by the trailer, and a man stepped out. He was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing clothes that cost more than my life savings. A designer vest, shoes that had never seen mud, and a watch that caught the sun and threw it back in my eyes. He scanned the fields with a sneer, then spotted me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Caleb. I am Daniel. Daniel Mitchell, your cousin." News to me, I thought. My father is Robert, your mother's brother. That makes us family. He said the word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "I'm here about the estate." I put down my trowel. "What about it? It should have been a family asset, not a gift to you." His grin widened, but his eyes remained cold as ice. We have questions about the will. Questions about whether Eleanor was, mentally, all there when she signed it. The words stung like a slap. She was my grandmother. She left this to me. That is what the will says. Paper is fragile. Courts are unpredictable. He pulled a folded document from his jacket. Here is the deal. Sign this. Take $50,000, walk away clean. No lawyers, no drama, no years of fighting. $50,000. A fortune. Enough to start over anywhere. But this dirt was mine. Eleanor gave it to me, I said. Not Daniel, not my mother, me. Why are you here now? Where were you 3 months ago? His mask slipped for a second. We didn't know about you. None of us did. My father assumed the land would revert to him until we heard she left it to some dropout. Naturally, there were concerns. Concerns about what? About the future, the value, making sure it doesn't fall into incapable hands. Then it clicked. You want to sell it? I realized. The land is valuable, Caleb, very valuable. Developers want this whole valley for resorts and vacation homes. This 40-acre stretch is sitting on a gold mine. 500 grand easy, maybe even more, $500,000. That was the price tag he put on the soil Eleanor had bled for the very ground where she coaxed life from the dirt. It was her sanctuary. My sanctuary now. I looked him dead in the eye and said, not for sale. The smirk wiped right off his face. Don't be stupid. You're broke, green, and alone out here. You'll crash and burn just like you always do. Take the $50,000 and walk away while you can. I didn't blink. No. Silence stretched tight between us. Daniel tucked the papers into his jacket, cool as ice. Big mistake. I'll tie this up in probate so tight you won't see a dime or a speck of dirt when I'm through. You're going to lose everything. He headed for his luxury ride, but stopped with his hand on the door. Oh, and the property taxes, $2,000, due in 90 days. County auctions don't wait for anyone. He flashed a shark's grin. Guess who'll be holding the winning bid? He peeled out, leaving me choking on exhaust and hanging dust. I stayed rooted to the spot long after he was gone, heart hammering against my ribs. 90 days, $2,000. I had maybe $400 to my name. Nowhere near enough. 3 months, and my whole life could be erased. What would you do? Imagine it. A stranger claiming to be blood waltzes and eyes on your inheritance, throwing threats around like confetti. He drops a bomb about family secrets, then puts a gun to your head, come up with $2 grand in 90 days, or get out. Do you fold run, or do you dig your heels in? Hit that subscribe button and let me know because I knew right then where I stood. What followed flipped the script entirely. That night, under the dim trailer lights, I pored over Eleanor's old diary, desperate for a lifeline. She'd known struggle. The years the rain never came, the floods that took everything, the sickness that thinned the herd. Losing Granddad left her solitary for nearly 20 years. But she never broke. She never ran. Beauty rises from dust, she wrote, if you've got the grit to find it. I had 90 days to turn a patch of dirt and a few hens into $2,000. And there it was tucked in the back pages, her legendary apple butter recipe. The stuff folks used to drive 50 miles just to taste. The jar that put Henderson Farm on the map. Outside, tangled in weeds but still standing, waited the very orchard that made it possible. Come morning, I trekked the 2 miles to Virgil's place. I laid out the whole ugly mess with Daniel. Virgil's weathered face tightened into a scowl. Daniel Mitchell, his dad Robert, came sniffing around years back right after Eleanor went into care. Tried to bully her into selling. She shut him down cold. Said this land belonged to kin who'd cherish it, not cash it out. Virgil met my gaze. Reckon she was talking about you. We headed to the old grove, 30 knobby ancient trees stretching out like old bones. But life was still there. Fresh green shoots and the tiny hard nubs of fruit clinging to the wood. Wealthy and Harrelson apples? Virgil noted, running a hand over the bark. Heirloom stock. Commercial growers don't bother with them now, but the taste... He paused. Unmatched. That's the secret to her butter. With a proper prune and some water, they might just pull through. They've got another 30 years in them easy. Eleanor planted these with her own hands. Poured her soul into this soil. He frowned. The clock is the problem. Harvest isn't until late August. You need that cash by early September. 90 days. It was too tight. What else is there I need $2 grand? My patch is tiny. I've got 4 hens. Virgil went quiet for a moment. Town market starts up in May, runs through October. Folks swarm that place every Saturday. If you can boost the garden and get those birds laying, you might scrape some cash together before the apples drop. The market. Right, Mabel had talked about it. I'll handle the trees, Virgil said. I'll teach you the pruning. And Mabel, her kitchen is certified. She might let you run your canning operation there. It was a lifeline. The pieces were finally locking into place. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a path. Why do this? I asked. You barely know me. Virgil's eyes crinkled. Your grandmother saved me once. Decades ago, I was young, dumb, and about to lose the farm. Eleanor floated me a loan. No interest, no paperwork. She just told me to help the next one in line. He squeezed my shoulder. This is me squaring the ledger. It's how we survive out here. We worked until dusk. Virgil showed me which wood was dead, how to shape the canopy, how to spot sickness. By sundown, my hands were raw and bloody, but the pain felt good. Every snip was a battle won for my home. The days melted into sweat and dirt. I doubled the garden plots. I threw up a second coop, bought 6 more layers, 10 birds total now. Spent nights mastering pickles in Mabel's kitchen. Then mid-May arrived. Market day. I arrived with nothing but a rickety folding table I'd loaned a sign I'd painted by hand that announced Henderson Heritage Farm, and a sad little assortment of goods. Just some spring greens, a handful of radishes, 24 eggs, and a couple of pickle jars. The table was bare in 3 hours. I only cleared $60, but the money didn't matter as much as the validation folks wanted what I was growing. It showed me that my family name still carried weight in this town. I returned the following week with a heavier load. By the time summer hit its stride, the soil was giving back in abundance. Vines were heavy with tomatoes, peppers, squash, and beans. Herbs and cucumbers grew wild. Pretty soon, the usual market crowd began looking for my face. Anyone seen the Henderson kid? Hearing that filled me with pride. But pride doesn't pay debts. When July faded, I had tucked away $800. Only 6 weeks remained before the taxes were due. I was still shy by $1,200. My entire future hung on the orchard. I became a hawk, circling those trees, inspecting the fruit, daily tracking every inch of growth and pleading with the sky to hold back the storms. Through the heat of late summer, the fruit plumped up, shifting from pale green to deep crimsons and golds. When the final week of August arrived, so did the harvest, and so did Virgil. Harlan showed up then, Earl. Even Mabel shut down her restaurant early to join the line. We labored from first light until dusk, hauling overflowing baskets to the barn and grading the fruit. We ended up with hundreds of pounds of heirloom fruit. It was a yield beyond my wildest dreams. Now comes the real work, Mabel told me, turning this into cash. We spent 2 weeks in her kitchen adhering strictly to Eleanor's old instructions. We simmered the fruit over a low flame, marrying it with clove and cinnamon until it collapsed into a dense, velvety spread. I poured the mixture into glass containers, sealed the lids tight, and applied my own handwritten labels to each one. Henderson Heritage Farm. Apple butter. On the opening Saturday of September, I took up 3 stalls. I built pyramids of glass jars, laid out dried chips and fresh produce, and hung my fresh sign. It read, Eleanor Henderson's famous apple butter, family recipe, established 1962. My stomach was in knots. I couldn't touch breakfast. But then the crowd arrived like a tide. The elders who held memories of Eleanor were the first in line. Younger couples who only knew the rumors followed. As soon as the sample spoons hit their tongues, their expressions lit up. Inventory moved fast. Folks were grabbing 3 jars at a clip. While they paid, they shared memories of visiting this land when they were just kids. She'd be beaming right now, an older lady whispered, squeezing a $20 bill into my palm and waving away the coins. Everything was gone in 2 hours flat. Not a single jar or apple remained. That evening, my hands trembled as I tallied the cash I'd cleared, over $800 in a single afternoon. I doubled the stock for the following weekend, and the result was the same. The week after that, empty tables again. When September closed out, the tax money was sitting in my tin. I marched into the county office with a stack of bills and a grin plastered across my face. Payment in full for the Henderson estate. The woman behind the counter double-checked the count, slammed a stamp on the paper, and slid it over. The debt was cleared. You're good until next year, she said. I stood outside on the pavement, gripping that slip of paper, scanning the lines repeatedly to make sure it was real. Settled. The dirt under my feet belonged to me now, truly. My mind drifted to Daniel and his ultimatums. I pictured his luxury sedan, his tailored suits, that icy smirk. He gave me 90 days to crash and burn. I'd thrived instead, but I knew better than to think he was done. Men like him don't just walk away. He'd return armed with attorneys and legal filings. The war wasn't finished. We were just in the opening rounds, but I was prepared. Those 90 days taught me a lesson Daniel could never grasp. I wasn't fighting solo. I had a whole town in my corner, friends who appeared exactly when things got dark. I had the ghost of a grandmother who loved me before I even knew her name. My roots were dug deep into this Montana earth now. I wasn't moving an inch. And mad. That concludes the second chapter. However, the true test was yet to come. A winter season that almost shattered my spirit. A revelation that shifted the ground beneath me, and a last stand against Daniel to decide the future of the land. If this journey resonates with you, please hit subscribe and stick around for the third installment. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Ever pulled off a win when the world bet on you losing? Ever discovered a reserve of power you didn't know you possessed? I want to read about your experiences. They mean a lot to me. Thanks for accompanying me on this path. Catch you in part 3. The Montana winter arrived like a wolf hunting in the dark. I'd been warned. Earl mentioned it, and Harlan did too. Even Mabel, who usually kept her cool, took me aside back in October to tell me to batten down the hatches. I honestly believed I was prepared. I'd stacked logs against the barn wall until the woodpile stood higher than my head. I purchased spare propane cylinders for the trailer heat, and I jarred enough veggies and preserves to burst the pantry shelves. I lined the chicken coop with heavy bales of hay and shifted the flock to the barn's most sheltered nook. But nothing could ready a man for the actual freeze. The initial snowfall hit in early November, a soft powder that turned the property into a picture-perfect scene, beautiful and benign. Round 2 hit 7 days later. 2 feet of powder dumped in 24 hours. The driveway vanished completely. I was cut off for 3 days straight before Earl punched through the drift in his truck to drop off goods and verify a pulse. Come December, the mercury plummeted to -10, then -20. Then came a night burned into my memory -35 degrees Fahrenheit. The frost felt alive. It seeped through the tiniest fissures, finding every gap and exploiting every flaw in the walls. The gas burner roared non-stop, burning through my reserves way too fast. Even buried under 3 layers of wool, the chill settled into the sheets. I had to cuddle with hot water jugs just to keep them liquid till morning. It didn't matter much. The frost always crept in. Eventually, I had to give up my shifts at the diner. Hiking out there became a death wish. Mabel was kind about it, though. She just said to hunker down, stay alive, and she'd see me when the thaw hit. Time lost its shape. Up before the sun. Make sure the heat is on. Tend to the birds. Fight with the well pump before it turned into a block of ice. Drag in logs. Scrape together a meal. Lose myself in Eleanor's diary under the lantern's glow. Crash. Do it again. Honestly, the silence hurt more than the frostbite. Weeks stretched out where I didn't see a single soul or hear a sound that I didn't make myself. That quiet, which felt like a blessing in July, turned into a weight on my chest by December. I started chatting with the hens just to break the stillness. Other times, I'd speak to Eleanor hoping she was listening from somewhere inside those old handwritten pages. It made me question if my vanishing would even register with anyone. It makes you ask yourself if you've ever really known isolation. I don't mean a quiet Sunday afternoon. I mean being completely severed from the world. That kind of empty space rewires your brain. It peels back the noise until you're staring right at your own soul. For some, that's where they find grit. For others, it's where they break. I think I touched both edges that season. The breaking point arrived in the middle of January, riding in on a gale that had been brewing all week. The clouds went that heavy leaden color that screams danger. I scrambled to batten down the hatches. Stacked logs to the ceiling, topped off the jugs, and tucked the birds in tight with thick straw and a warming bulb running off Harlan's loaner generator. The tempest struck right at 12. The sound of that wind was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It shrieked against the metal siding, vibrating the whole frame and rattling the glass. The whiteout was so dense the barn just vanished from sight. The mercury plummeted past -25, then 30, then 35. Around 2 a.m., the furnace sputtered a couple of times and went silent. I went into panic mode. Tightened the lines, swept the exhaust, clicked the igniter until my thumb was sore. It was dead. Some internal part had likely snapped in the deep freeze, and I didn't have the skills or parts to bring it back. The warmth evaporated instantly. I could physically feel the freeze invading the room, taking over every corner. Breathing looked like smoking. Ice crystals started blooming on the inside of the glass. Staying put wasn't an option. Remaining there meant I wouldn't wake up. I started piling on every garment I could find. Triple socks, double trousers, 4 layers of wool, my thickest parka, and a beanie jammed down low. My gloves felt useless before I even opened the door. I unlatched the exit and stepped into the void. The gust slammed into me like a fist. I was blind the second the snow hit my eyes. Visibility was 0. The outbuilding was only 50 yards out, but it felt like 50 miles. I tucked my chin and marched. Moving was a war. The drifts were hip-deep and the gale kept shoving me sideways. The bits of skin I couldn't cover stung like fire, then lost all feeling. Inhaling felt like swallowing glass. About midway across the yard, my legs gave out. I'm not sure what caught my boot, maybe a stone or some old tool hidden under the powder. I went from upright to face-planted in the ice in a heartbeat. Forcing myself back up took every ounce of willpower I had. Every muscle begged me to just lie there and sleep. It felt so inviting to just let go. But I refused to fade out. My mind went to Eleanor weathering decades of storms just like this one all on her own. I remembered her diary entries, the messages left for the next caretaker. She trusted me with this dirt, and I wasn't about to fail her. I hauled myself up and pushed forward. By some miracle, my hand found the latch. I stumbled inside and crashed onto the straw. The hens were making anxious little noises. That single bulb bathed everything in a weak amber light. It wasn't exactly hot, but it broke the wind, and that was enough. I dragged myself over to the birds and wedged my body between the bales. The blood rushing back into my extremities felt like needles. Keeping my eyelids apart was a losing battle. Then I noticed my cell. It must have survived the trek in my jacket. It was nearly dead, but the screen still lit up. Daniel's contact info was staring right at me. He'd forced it on me the day he showed up to intimidate me. When you wake up, he'd told me. $50,000. Plenty to catch a flight to the tropics and reset where the weather isn't trying to murder you. I just sat there hypnotized by the digits on the screen. I replayed the whole ordeal. The backbreaking labor, the solitude, the sheer fight to keep breathing. I had to ask if it made sense. Was a patch of earth worth a frozen grave? My thumb hovered over the dial icon. The chill was still radiating through the timber. Outside, the gale was still howling. My own breath hung in the air like a ghost. Even with the shelter, I knew one phone call and a quick autograph could end the suffering. I was inches away from giving in. Then I took a breath and looked around. I saw the flock I'd nurtured since they were fuzzy yellow balls. I saw the tools I'd mastered. I looked up at the loft where I first cracked Eleanor's book and smelled the dried grass that still held the scent of a summer gone by. Gazing at the rough timber my grandmother's hands had polished over a lifetime. This was where I belonged. 40 acres of soil and memory, all mine. Not because a deed in the courthouse said so, but because I'd paid for it in sweat. Every sore muscle, every dawn patrol, every exhausted collapse at midnight. I'd ground my soul into this dirt until we were one and the same. I slid the phone back into my pocket. Burrowing into the hay, I pulled the scratchy horse blankets up to my chin and prayed for sunrise. Somehow, I made it through. That second in the dark finger hovering over Daniel's number, that was rock bottom. It hurts to admit how close I was to throwing in the towel. But maybe we need those breaking points. They teach us that being strong doesn't mean you're fearless. It just means you put one foot in front of the other even when you're scared to death. Ever been there? That moment when quitting makes all the sense in the world, but you dig deep and keep pushing. Tell me about it. Your truth might be the lifeline someone else needs right now. The blizzard raged for another 48 hours. When the winds finally died down, the landscape was unrecognizable. A heavy white quilt hid the world, turning jagged rocks into soft glowing mounds under the winter light. It was so peaceful you'd almost forget it tried to kill you. I was huddled in the corner when a low rumble cut through the silence. My mind played tricks on me at first. 3 days of isolation will do that. But the growl got closer, followed by shouting. It was Earl and Harlan. They'd been blowing up my phone, but the storm had snapped the local towers like twigs. When silence was the only answer they got, they feared the worst. The second the roads were passable, they loaded the truck and headed my way. They found me shivering in the straw, huddled up with the hens for warmth. "Son, you look like hell," Earl rasped, the relief thick in his voice. "We thought you were a goner." My jaw was locked too tight to answer. I just sat there vibrating with cold while they swaddled me in wool and hauled me up. Then they went to work fixing my life. Harlan swapped out a busted fitting on the propane heater while Earl cleared a walkway through the drifts. They brought hot coffee, real food, and human voices. Later, Mabel showed up and didn't mince words. "You scared the life out of us." She squeezed me until my ribs groaned. "Don't you dare pull a stunt like that again." I mumbled something about having no choice, but she cut me off. "You had plenty of options. You could have reached out before the snow started falling, asked for a hand." She looked me dead in the eye. "That is the whole point of having neighbors. We look out for our own. Stop trying to be a hero." Deep down, I knew she was spot on. My need to prove I could do it alone nearly killed me. That's a mistake you only make once. The rest of the season was brutal, but we got through it. I stopped fighting the help. I let Earl swing by. I said yes when folks offered a hand, and I realized that calling for backup isn't about being weak. It's about being smart. Through the thaw, I kept poring over Eleanor's diary, feeling her spirit in the pages, unaware there was still one big secret left to find. The pieces finally clicked together near the end of February. I was mucking out this barn getting ready for the planting season when my mind drifted back to that little brass key I'd looted from her keepsake box. It had been rattling around in my pocket for months, a riddle without an answer. While I was shifting some rusted gear, I spotted something odd. A metal strongbox shoved deep between the bales, hidden under layers of grime. It had a tiny slot that looked like the perfect match for the key in my pocket. My fingers trembled as I slid the brass into the lock, like it was made for it. A satisfying click, and the lid popped. Inside lay a sheaf of documents and a pristine envelope with Caleb scrawled in her familiar script. I sank down right there in the dirt, heart hammering against my ribs, and tore the seal. "My sweet Caleb," it started. "If these words are finding you, then you finally come back to where you belong. It means you were brave enough to show up when everyone else turned away. I knew my faith in you wasn't misplaced. I'm running out of time, but there's so much to say. Let's begin with the truth: you were loved. Never doubt that. From your very first breath, you were my heart. I fought to be in your life. I sent letters, I rang the phone, I mailed a card for every single birthday. But your mother built a wall between us. Returned mail, blocked numbers, gifts thrown in the trash. I still don't understand her reasons. I don't know what crime I committed to earn that kind of resentment. But I never gave up on you. I held on to the hope that one day the fog would lift. I'm leaving you this land because it's the only thing of real value I possess. Not because of what it's worth in dollars, but for what it holds. Our blood is in this soil 4 generations deep. I was a child here. I became a mother here, and I said goodbye to your grandfather right here under that ancient oak near the water. It's yours because I know you see it. You feel the pulse of this place just like I did. But be warned, the vultures are circling. My own children are just waiting for me to pass so they can cash out and split the loot. They see a paycheck. They don't see the legacy. They don't see the love. That's why I've left you this paper trail. Inside this chest, you'll uncover a certified duplicate of my testament securely lodged with an attorney up in Missoula. I didn't use the family solicitor. This is independent counsel specifically instructed to reach out should anyone attempt to contest your birthright. Enclosed is a formal statement verifying the document is ironclad. My faculties were sharp and my intent was clear. 3 separate individuals bore witness, and we followed every Montana statute to the letter. This soil is yours, and no soul on earth can strip it away. Not a single one. My only regret is missing the chance to watch you breathe life back into this homestead. I ache to sit beside you on the veranda viewing the dusk just as your grandfather and I once did. Since I cannot physically share those moments, I ask only this. Understand that I linger in the morning light, in the fruit of the grove, and within the ink of my diary. Stand tall, my sweet child. Have courage. Recall that a true home is not discovered, it is forged. Loving you eternally, your grandmother Eleanor. Placing the note aside, I dug deeper into the container. It wasn't empty. A thick stack of mail sat there bound by an old brittle elastic. There had to be at least 50 of them, every single one bearing my name in Eleanor's precise script. They were all directed to my parents' place in Seattle, and every last one was marred by the same harsh red stamp. Undeliverable. I scattered the pile across the wooden planks of the barn. Here lay the voice of a matriarch I was never allowed to meet. Greetings for every solitary birthday I'd celebrated. Updates for every Christmas season. Simple notes just to say I was on her mind or wishing me well. She penned these monthly, occasionally weekly. For 18 long years, she tried to bridge the distance with ink and paper. And for 18 years my mother and father rejected them without breaking a seal. I grabbed a card blindly. It was for my 10th year. The interior read, "Happiest of days to my precious grandson. May this season grant you happiness and new journeys." How I long to watch you extinguish the flames on your cake. Just remember, no matter the distance, your grandmother holds you in her heart. I never got that message. Never knew it was real. All that time believing I was alone in the world. Every anniversary of my birth where I felt abandoned clears throat. Yet she remained constant, adoring me from afar, refusing to surrender hope. I collected every envelope. I intended to go through each one in time. Just not right now. In this moment I could only clutch them close and shed tears for the time stolen from us. Let me halt the narrative for a second before revealing the conclusion. Have you ever unearthed a reality that shattered your worldview, discovered evidence of affection when you were convinced of your own isolation? Such revelations can fracture a soul or mend it, often doing both simultaneously. If you hold a similar tale, I invite you to leave it below. To me, each missive Eleanor drafted was a prayer, a belief that affection would eventually break through. And ultimately, it succeeded. The timeline just stretched far beyond our anticipation. The thaw arrived sluggishly in Montana. Ice turned to water, and the fruit trees erupted in white petals. This terrain, which once threatened my existence, regained its splendor. I pushed the vegetable patch out to cover a full acre. I brought in a half-dozen more chickens and purchased 2 milk goats from Virgil. Mabel began teaching me the art of cheese-making. Market season number 2 outperformed the debut. My stall boasted crisp greens, farm eggs, chèvre, and spiced fruit spreads. Customers flocked to my setup. Even city bistros began requesting bulk shipments. Yet, I remained aware that Daniel wasn't finished. He reappeared toward the end of March, right as the final drifts were vanishing. He arrived with an entourage, this round 2 attorneys in sharp tailoring, clutching satchels heavy with paperwork. I stood my ground by the camper dressed in my soil-stained gear, with grit beneath my nails and Eleanor's correspondence in my grip. "Final opportunity," Daniel announced. He sounded assured, yet his gaze wavered upon noticing the bundle I carried. "Relinquish the deed and I'll cut you a check for $75,000. That is the ceiling." A grin spread across my face, the first genuine one I'd shown him. "I've got some reading material for your legal team." I passed over the contents of Eleanor's chest, the certified testament, the memo from her counsel Sarah Chen, and the evidence that every step was valid, lawful, and binding. I studied their expressions while they scanned the pages. Their arrogance evaporated, replaced by bewilderment, worry, and a hint of panic. One associate dragged Daniel out of earshot. They engaged in a hushed, frantic exchange. The dialogue was inaudible, but Daniel's complexion deepened to a furious crimson. Eventually, he pivoted to face me. "This alters nothing," he claimed, though the bite was gone from his tone. "I will locate grounds to contest it. I'll discover a technicality. You are going to fail. You'll burn cash on defense and still end up with nothing. Eleanor outwitted you, Daniel. She anticipated this move decades back." He just glared at me before marching silently toward his vehicle. His legal team trailed behind, gripping the papers. He paused at the handle. "Your folks had you pegged correctly. Obstinate. A mirror image of that old woman." "I appreciate that," I replied. "Best compliment I've received in years." He slid into the driver's seat. Before slamming the door, he shot me one final glance. "Your parents turned down this estate, you realize, on several occasions? They couldn't stand this place. They thought Eleanor had lost her mind, leaving it to me instead of just selling it off and splitting the cash." "I know," I said softly. "She warned me in the letter." He stared at me. "And you still want this, even knowing your own family thinks you're making a mistake." I gazed out over the 40 acres that were finally mine. I looked at the old barn where I'd barely scraped through the winter, the orchard on the brink of blossoming, the soil begging to be planted, the footprint of a cabin I was already constructing in my mind. "This isn't just real estate, Daniel. It is my grandmother's love made solid. It was in every sapling she watered, every fence post she drove, every sunrise she witnessed from a porch that no longer stood. She poured her soul into this soil, and she trusted me to keep it breathing." I turned to face him. "So, yes, I still want it. I'll always want it, and I'm going to spend the rest of my days proving her faith in me was right." Daniel just shook his head slowly. Then he shut the car door and drove off. I never saw him again. That was 3 years ago. If you saw the farm today, you wouldn't believe it was the same place. Where a burnt-out ruin once stood there is now a small cabin with a green metal roof and a porch looking west toward the setting sun. I built it with my own hands alongside Heron and Earl and a dozen others who arrived with tool belts and wisdom. One bedroom, a bath, and a kitchen flooded with morning light. Simple and modest, but entirely mine. The old trailer became the farm store, painted barn red to match shelves stocked with goods bearing the Henderson Heritage Farm label. Apple butter, dried fruit, pickles, jams, fresh eggs, seasonal crops, goat cheese, and soap. The stats might not impress anyone else. 30 hens where there used to be 4. 5 acres of productive garden replacing wild weeds. A flock of heritage turkeys. 12 goats, and an orchard that yielded over 1,000 pounds of apples last autumn. I launched a blog that first winter chronicling the journey on nights when the isolation felt like it might swallow me whole. I never expected a soul to read it, but they found it. Thousands of them. People trapped in lives that felt 2 sizes too small. People daydreaming of a reset. People who needed to see that it was actually possible. Then they started reaching out. First a trickle, then dozens, then more than I could tally. That is how I met Jessamine. She emailed me in the spring of year 2. 25 years old, working a corporate gig in Denver that was grinding her spirit to dust. Dreaming of an escape, she asked to visit for a week to learn sustainable farming. She stayed a month, then another. Then she stopped talking about leaving. We aren't married yet, but we will be. There is no need to rush when you are building something designed to last forever. Last Saturday, we hosted our very first workshop. 12 people traveled from as far away as California and Florida, paying to spend a weekend learning the homesteading life. They slept in the barn loft we'd turned into guest quarters. They worked side by side with us in the dirt. They asked questions I was surprised to find I could answer. On the final evening, we gathered on the cabin porch to watch the sun go down. The sky turned those impossible colors Eleanor described in her journals, pink and orange and gold, bleeding into one another. The same sunset she watched for 60 years. The same view her parents and grandparents cherished before her. Jessamine asked me to read from Eleanor's diary. I picked the passage that had carried me through my darkest nights. If anyone from my family ever returns here, I hope they see what I see. Not the toil or the loneliness, but the freedom. The connection to something real and solid. The opportunity to craft a life with your own hands. This land has given me everything. And if I could give my grandchildren any gift, it would be the courage to take a different path. When I finished, the group was silent. Some were weeping. A woman about my mother's age walked up and took my hands. "Thank you for sharing her with us," she said, "for showing us it's not too late to start over. I think about Eleanor every single day. The woman who loved me from a distance. Who prepared the way for me years before I even knew I was coming. Who bet everything on me when no one else would." I visit her grave now, a simple headstone beside my grandfather's under the old oak by the creek. I tell her about the farm, the chickens and goats, the apple butter that sells out weekly, Jessamine and the life we're building. I like to think she hears me, that somewhere, somehow she knows her faith wasn't wasted. My parents never called, not when the farm was in the magazine, not when the news station ran a story on the young man saving the Henderson legacy, not even when I sent a letter explaining it all. I don't know if they feel guilty. I don't know if they think of me at all. But I've learned you can't wait for people to become who you need them to be. You build your life with the ones who show up. The neighbors, the friends, the strangers who become family simply because they choose to stay. I arrived on this property clutching $300 and a soul that felt shattered, only to discover 40 acres of untamed wilderness and the echo of a grandmother's affection reaching out from the past. This sanctuary was raised on more than just timber and steel. It was forged from grit, a fragile hope, and the quiet grace of neighbors who held on to faith for me when I had none left for myself. So, as I settle onto these porch steps, watching the Montana sky burn into twilight with Jessamine right here, the truth of Eleanor's lesson finally hits home. Hitting the bottom gives you the freedom to climb, and a true home isn't discovered on a map. It is carved out by your own labor. My tale wraps up here, but I am praying it serves as the prologue for your own adventure. If this journey struck a chord within you, please join our community and pass this along to a soul in need of some light. Maybe someone feeling trapped, fearful, or convinced that fresh starts are impossible. Drop a line below to describe your ambitions and share what you are constructing. Talk to me about the bravery you are scraping together day by day, because I go through every single message, and I swear to you your voice carries more weight than you imagine. I appreciate you taking this journey by my side and for betting on a local kid who began with zero and managed to create a whole world. Keep in mind, no matter where you stand or what mountains you are climbing, Eleanor's wisdom holds for you as well. You have the capacity to manifest beauty from the void provided you are brave enough to attempt it. Go on, create a wonder of your own. Catch you further down the trail.